It took me 9 months to finally take off my wedding ring after he left the house, and 3 more years to stop waiting for him to come back. Sounds crazy. I know. How could a woman with a PhD in education, respected in her community, mother of 3 adult children, spend 3 whole years waiting for a man who abandoned her? But the truth is, when you spend 30 years being shaped to believe you don't exist without someone, taking a ring off your finger is like ripping off a piece of your own skin. My name is Lauren Martinez. I'm 52 years old, and this is the story of how I spent most of my life invisible, even in my own marriage. I met David when I was only 15 years old. I know what you're thinking, and yes, today I see all the problems with that equation. But back then, in a small town in Arkansas, in the mid-'80s, things were different. Or maybe they were exactly the same, and I just hadn't learned to see it yet. I had just left my mother's house after a situation that broke me inside. Her boyfriend sexually harassed me, and when I had the courage to tell her, she didn't believe me. That was like taking a bullet. Your own mother looking you in the eyes and choosing to believe him instead of you. So I went to live with my father, a man I barely knew, in a trailer park on the other side of town. That's where I met David. He was a friend of a distant cousin, worked at a mechanic shop, had that confident way about him, like someone who already knew what he wanted from life. And I was a 15-year-old girl completely lost, without a mother, without a home, without direction. He looked at me like I was special. He took me 4 rides in his old blue Chevy, bought me milkshakes at the drive-in, made me laugh. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I felt important to someone. 5 months later, I was pregnant. My father reacted with that tired resignation of someone who's seen too much in life. He sat with me at the little Formica kitchen table, lit a cigarette, and said, "Well, Lauren, a year from now, you'll be back to normal life. Just with one more baby." There was no yelling, no drama, just that cold acceptance that my fate was sealed. Marriage was the only path. David also accepted with the same naturalness. We were both poor. We both came from broken families, so it made sense to build something together, even if it was from nothing. We got married in February 1988 in a small ceremony at the Baptist church. I wore a simple white dress that my aunt sewed. I was 4 months pregnant, and I had just turned 16. David wore the only suit he owned, smelled like Old Spice, and smiled like he was genuinely happy. Maybe he was. Maybe at that moment, he really believed we would make it. Or maybe he just knew he had found someone who would never question, never challenge, never leave. Our first son, Brandon, was born in July. He was perfect, tiny, with those huge eyes, completely dependent on me. And one, at 16 years old, was completely dependent on David. The first years were pure survival. We lived in a tiny apartment that smelled like mold, with an air conditioner that never worked right. David worked long hours at the shop, and I stayed home with Brandon, trying to make the welfare money stretch. Real food was a luxury. Lots of mac and cheese with butter, lots of peanut butter sandwiches. Both families helped as they could, but nobody had much. I remember spending hours looking out the window, watching other girls my age going to school, laughing, living their lives, while I was there, stuck in an endless cycle of diapers, bottles, and a loneliness that hurt in my chest. But I wanted more. Even without really understanding what that more was, I knew it couldn't be just that. So when Brandon was 2, I enrolled in a teacher certification program at the community college. David didn't like it. "What do you need that for?" he'd say. "You already have work here at home, and we need money now, not 5 years from now." But for the first time in my life, I insisted. I took all the night classes I could, studied when Brandon slept, carried books everywhere. I was pregnant with our second son, Tyler, when I finally got my certification. In 1996, pregnant with our third, our daughter Maya, I started teaching at an elementary school. Working was like breathing for the first time. At school, I had a voice. The children listened to me, respected me, loved me. Colleagues valued me. I was good at what I did, and that was a completely new feeling. So I continued. I got my bachelor's degree, then master's, then doctorate in education. I studied in the early morning hours, on weekends, in every free minute I could find. David tolerated it, but always with that tone of silent disapproval. He never directly said stop, but he always made it clear that it was less important than his needs, the house's needs, the children's needs. Still, I persisted, because at work, I existed. At home, I was beginning to realize I was just a shadow. The criticisms started subtle. That hair doesn't look good on you, Lauren. Why do you dress like that? You look old? Did you have dessert? Aren't you already a little overweight? At first, I thought he was trying to help me, that he cared about my appearance, because he loved me. But over Chimi, each comment was a small death. I stopped looking at myself in the mirror. I bought clothes he'd approve of. I cut my hair the way he liked it. And even so, it was never enough. There was always something wrong. I was too shy, spoke too softly, didn't know how to behave in public. I started to believe there was something fundamentally wrong with me. David controlled everything, but in such a subtle way that it took me decades to notice. He never yelled, never hit, never cursed. But every decision went through him. Where we'd go on vacation, how we'd spend money, what school the kids would attend, what car I'd drive. And if I disagreed, he simply ignored my opinion until I got tired and accepted what he wanted. I learned it was easier not to have an opinion. Easier to say whatever you decide. Easier to disappear. I thought that's how marriages worked. My mother never had her own voice. My aunt lived under her husband's command. The women at church always talked about submitting to your husband as if it were a virtue. So I submitted. For 30 years, I submitted. And honestly, I thought everything was fine. I thought we were happy. We didn't fight because I never confronted. We didn't argue because I always agreed. He was a present, caring father, a provider. We built a life together, raised 3 beautiful children, bought a house. From the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. That's why February 2018 was so special. 30 years of marriage. David agreed to renew our vows in a beautiful ceremony, with the whole family present. Our 3 children, already adults, our 2 young grandchildren. I planned every detail for months. I bought a new dress, reserved a hall, hired a photographer. David even suggested a trip to Italy afterward, something that had always been my dream. That night, dancing with him in the hall, decorated with fairy lights, I looked into his eyes and thought, we made it. 30 years, and we're still here. I did it right. 2 months later, on a regular Tuesday in April, he came home from work, sat on the living room couch, and said, Lauren, I want to be free. I don't want this anymore. I don't want you anymore, just like that, direct. No preparation, no context, no explanation. 30 years of marriage ended in 2 sentences. I stood there at the entrance to the living room, still holding a dish towel, trying to process what I'd just heard. My first reaction was to laugh, not from happiness, but that nervous way when your brain can't accept reality. You're kidding, right? I said. He shook his head. I've never been more serious in my life. And at that moment, standing there in my own living room, with the smell of dinner still in the air, I felt the floor open up beneath my feet and swallow me whole. But the worst was still to come, because David didn't leave the house that night. He stayed. For 4 whole months, he continued living there with me, sleeping in the guest room, going out every night, coming back at dawn, smelling like perfume and alcohol, while I died a little more each day. And he forbade me from asking a single question about where he was or who he was with. Now, looking back, I can see the signs were always there. But when you're inside a situation, when you've been trained your whole life not to trust your own instincts, it's impossible to see. Or maybe you do see, but your brain simply refuses to process it because accepting the truth means your whole world will crumble. So you ignore it, you rationalize, you make excuses, you do anything to maintain the illusion that everything's okay. Because the alternative is an abyss you don't have the courage to face. The last 2 years of the marriage were strange, in a way I couldn't name. David started traveling more for work, or at least that's what he said. He had been promoted to regional supervisor at the distribution company where he worked, so it made sense he'd be on the road more often. 2, 3 times a week, he'd leave Monday morning and only come back Friday night. When he was home, he seemed distant. Not physically, he was still there. Ate dinner with us, watched TV, slept in our bed, but emotionally, it was like he'd built an invisible wall between us. I tried to talk about my day, about the grandkids, about anything, and he'd respond with monosyllables, eyes glued to his phone. The phone? That damn phone. David had always been discreet with his phone, but in the last months, before asking for divorce, he became obsessed. He'd take it to the bathroom, sleep with it under his pillow. If I got close, he'd flip the screen down so fast it was almost reflexive. Once, I asked casually, "Who's texting you at this hour?" And he exploded. Didn't yell. David never yelled, but that cold, cutting tone that hurt more than any yelling. "Lauren, since when do I need to justify everything to you? Don't you trust me? After 30 years, you think I'm doing what? Cheating on you." And then he turned it around, like he always did. "Maybe the problem is you. Maybe you're projecting something. You've been acting strange lately." I apologized. I always apologized. Said I was being silly, that I was stressed from work, that I trusted him completely. But at night, lying next to him while he snored, I'd stay awake staring at the ceiling, that knot in my throat that wouldn't go down. My intuition screamed that something was wrong, but I had spent 30 years learning to silence my own voice. So I pushed that feeling down, way down deep, and pretended everything was fine. Because if I admitted it wasn't, what would I do? I didn't know how to exist without David. My entire identity was tied to being his wife. There was one night, a few months before he asked for a divorce, that I woke up at 3 in the morning and he wasn't in bed. I went looking through the house and found him on the back porch, sitting in the dark, talking quietly on the phone. When he saw me, he hung up immediately. "Who was that?" I asked, my heart racing. "Work," he said. "Problem with the delivery on the West Coast. Different time zone." It made sense. It made complete sense. But why did he hang up so quickly when he saw me? Why was he whispering? I stood there, in my nightgown, barefoot on the cold floor, wanting to ask more questions but afraid of the answers. So I just said, "Oh, okay, come back to bed when you're done." And I went back to the bedroom alone, pretending to believe. The trips got longer. A whole week? 10 days. He'd call every day, always at the same time, 6 in the evening. "After work," he said. The call lasted 5 minutes. "Hi, honey. Everything okay? How are the kids? Okay? Kiss. Gotta go. Click." I'd be left holding the phone, that silence on the other end echoing in my ear, feeling like I was talking to a stranger. Where was the intimacy? Where was the connection? We had 30 years of history together, 3 children, 2 grandchildren, a lifetime shared, and our conversations had become quick, efficient, empty transactions. I started noticing small things. Once, when washing his clothes after a trip, I found a restaurant receipt, dinner for 2 at an Italian place in Dallas, $200, expensive wine. We never spent $200 on dinner, not even on anniversaries. I confronted him, hands shaking, holding the piece of paper. "That was with the boss," he said, without even looking up from the newspaper. "Business meeting. You know how it is." Did I know? Did I really know? Or was I so desperate to believe that I kept swallowing every lie he served? Our sex life had died years ago, but in the last months before the bomb dropped, he didn't even touch me anymore. No goodnight kiss. No morning hug. When I tried any closeness, he'd pull away with excuses, tired, stressed, back pain. I started to feel repulsive. Had I gained that much weight? Had I aged in a way that disgusted him? I bought new lingerie, tried to dress up more, but nothing worked. He simply didn't want me anymore, and I didn't understand why. The blame, of course, could only be mine. I told my best friend, Susan, that I was worried. We were having coffee at the mall, and I finally let it slip. "I think something's wrong with David." Susan paused with her cup in the air. Wrong. How? I hesitated. Saying it out loud made it real. I don't know. He's distant. He travels a lot. He doesn't talk to me. My voice failed. He doesn't touch me anymore, Susan. It's been months. Susan took my hand across the table. Have you guys thought about couples therapy? Therapy. As if the problem was both of us. As if I hadn't tried everything to be the perfect wife for 30 whole years. I suggested therapy to David that same night. He laughed. That short, disdainful laugh I had learned to fear. Therapies? For what, Lauren? Because you're making up problems that don't exist. Look, I know you're going through menopause, that your hormones are messed up, but don't project your insecurities onto me. I'm working hard to support this family. If I'm tired, it's because I'm carrying this weight alone. And that was it. Again, the problem was me. My hormones. My insecurities. My inability to be grateful for the hard-working man I had. I swallowed my tears and apologized. Again, the vow renewal in February was my last desperate attempt to save something that, I realize now, had been dead for a long time. I thought if we did something special, something meaningful, he'd remember why we got married. He'd remember that he loved me. The ceremony was beautiful. David was charming, smiled for the photos, danced with me, gave an emotional speech about our journey together. Everyone commented on how we were the perfect couple, how rare it was to see such lasting love. I believed it. That night, I really believed we had gotten back on track. But something changed after that party. David became even more distant, if that was possible. The trips increased. He barely spoke to me. When I tried to start a conversation, he'd cut me off with impatience. One night, in late March, he got home almost midnight, even though he supposedly wasn't traveling. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Went out for a few beers with the guys from work," he said, walking right past me toward the bathroom. I smelled it. Perfume. Not my perfume. A sweet, cloying perfume that hung in the air even after he closed the bathroom door. My stomach turned. I stayed awake all night. Was I crazy? Was it paranoia? But perfume doesn't lie. You don't come home smelling like another woman after drinking beer with the guys. Unless I couldn't even complete the thought. Because if I completed it, if I allowed that possibility to become real in my head, I wouldn't know what to do. Divorce at 45 years old, after 30 years of marriage, 3 children, a lifetime built together. Who would I be without David? I had no idea. So when he sat on the couch that Tuesday in April and said he wanted to be free, part of me, a tiny part, buried deep down, wasn't surprised. Shocked, yes. Devastated, completely. But surprised? No. Because on some level, I already knew. My body already knew. That constant knot in my stomach, those sleepless nights, that feeling of losing my mind, it wasn't craziness. It was my instinct screaming what my heart refused to hear. He didn't love me anymore. He probably hadn't loved me for years. And I had pretended not to see because the truth was too terrible to face. But the part I didn't expect, the part that broke me completely, was what came next. Because David didn't leave the house that day, he stayed. In the following 4 months were the most refined hell I've ever experienced. He turned our house into a psychological torture camp where I was the only prisoner, and he was the guard who held all the keys. David stayed living in our house for 4 months after announcing he wanted a divorce. For months. That felt like for years. He moved to the guest room at the end of the hall, but continued using the kitchen, the living room, the main bathroom when he wanted. He treated the house like a hotel, and me like I was invisible. Or worse, like I was an inconvenient piece of furniture he had to walk around. I tried to talk in the first few days, tried to understand what had happened, tried to ask if there was anything I could do to fix it. He'd cut me off before I even finished the sentence. "Lauren, I already told you what I want. I want my freedom. There's nothing to fix. It's over." But if it was over, why was he still there? That question consumed me. Our kids were already adults, had their own homes. The house technically belonged to both of us, but I had money from my teacher's retirement. I could have bought out his half or sold and split it. Why didn't he just leave? The answer, I realize now, is control. David needed to maintain control until the last second. He needed to see me suffer. He needed to break me completely before leaving for good. Because if I had any dignity left, any remnant of self-worth, I might eventually move on. And he couldn't allow that. The house rules changed overnight. He established that I couldn't ask questions about where he went, who he was with, what he did. It's none of your business, he'd say, grabbing his car keys and walking out the door, leaving me standing there in the kitchen, heart shattered, not even entitled to an explanation. He'd go out every night around 8, 9 o'clock, come back at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. I'd hear the key turning in the lock, hear his heavy footsteps in the hallway, hear the guest room door closing, and I'd lie there in the bed we shared for 30 years, alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering where he was, who he was with, what I had done so wrong to deserve that. I started losing weight rapidly. Not because I was dieting, I simply couldn't eat. My stomach was constantly tied in a tight knot that never loosened. The smell of food made me nauseous. I'd force down a few spoonfuls of yogurt in the morning, maybe a piece of toast at night, and that was it. In 6 weeks, I lost 15 pounds. My clothes hung loose. My face looked gaunt. People at work started asking if I was sick. I'm fine. I'd lie, just a little stressed. How do you explain to your colleagues that your husband is living with you but treating you like garbage? How do you admit you're living in a nightmare while awake? Sleep disappeared. I'd lie down at 10 at night, exhausted to my bones, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I'd replay the last 30 years, trying to identify where I'd gone wrong. Was I a bad wife? Was I affectionate enough? Attractive enough? Interesting enough? I had 3 college degrees, a successful career, had raised 3 wonderful children, but none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was that I hadn't been enough to make my husband love me. And that fundamental failure to be lovable seemed to confirm everything I'd always suspected about myself, that there was something wrong with me, something broken, something that made even the people who were supposed to love me choose not to. There was one night in May, almost a month after he announced a divorce, that I heard laughter coming from his room. Laughter. He was on the phone, and I could hear that tone of voice, that flirty, seductive tone he hadn't used with me in years. Maybe never had. I stood frozen in the hallway, leaning against the wall, hearing my husband court another woman from the other side of the door. I know, baby, he was saying. Soon I'll be free. Just a little longer, I promise. Baby. He was calling someone baby while I was 3 feet away, dying inside. I went back to my room, closed the door, threw myself on the bed, and cried until I had no more tears. Cried until I was empty. I told my daughter, Maya. She came to visit me on a Saturday afternoon, found the house a mess, something that never happened with me, and found me still in pajamas at 2 in the afternoon. Mom, what's going on? She asked, worry stamped on her face. I told her everything. About the divorce, about David living there, about the nights he went out, about the woman on the phone. Maya went Polly. Mom, you need to get out of this house. You need to get away from him. This isn't healthy. I shook my head. I can't, Maya. I have nowhere to go. And if I leave, if I give up, then it's really over. As long as he's here, there's a chance. A small chance that he'll change his mind. Maya held my face with both hands. Mom, listen to me. He's not going to change his mind. He's using you. He's hurting you on purpose. You deserve better than this. But I couldn't hear, because if I accepted there was no chance, that it was really over, then what was left? A lifetime wasted. 30 years in a marriage that wasn't real. 3 children raised in a lie. I couldn't accept that, so I kept waiting. Kept believing, kept dying a little more each day. David started bringing the smell of other women into our house. It wasn't just occasional perfume anymore. It was every day. Sweet perfume, woody perfume, floral perfume. Each different scent was a new stab. He wasn't even trying to hide it. One morning, I found an earring on the living room rug. A large gold hoop, earring, flashy, nothing I would wear. I held that piece of metal in my hand, shaking, feeling reality crush me. He was bringing other women to our house, to the house where we raised our children, to the place that was supposed to be our sanctuary. I left the earring on the kitchen counter in plain sight. He saw it, picked it up, threw it in the trash, and didn't say a word. Didn't deny, didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge, just threw it away and continued as if nothing had happened. I stopped functioning properly at work. I was vice principal of an elementary school, had 200 children and 20 teachers under my responsibility, but I could barely concentrate in a meeting. I'd forget appointments, lose important papers. Once, a teacher found me crying in the women's bathroom between classes. "Dr. Martinez, are you okay?" she asked, voice full of concern. "I'm great," I said, wiping my face with paper towel, trying to fix my smeared makeup. "Just a hard day." But it wasn't just one day. It was every day. It was waking up every morning and having to find the strength to get out of bed. It was having to pretend everything was fine when inside I was falling apart. My kids started pressuring David to leave. Brandon, my oldest, confronted his father on a Sunday in June. They argued in the garage. I could hear the voices rising. Brandon yelling, "How can you do this to her? How can you live here and torture her like this?" David responded with that cold, cruel calm he had mastered. "This isn't your business, Brandon. It's between me and your mother. And if she wants me to leave, she can ask." "But she doesn't, does she?" He was right. I didn't ask. Because asking meant admitting defeat, meant accepting it was over. And I still wasn't ready for that. But my body was betraying me. Besides the weight loss and insomnia, I started having anxiety attacks. The first one happened in a supermarket. I was choosing tomatoes when suddenly my heart raced, my vision blurred, my chest tightened like I was having a heart attack. I dropped my bag, leaned on the shopping cart, trying to breathe, but it was like there wasn't enough air. A clerk came running, took me to sit in the back, called 911. At the hospital, after all the tests, the doctor said, "Mrs. Martinez, there's nothing physically wrong with your heart, but you're under severe stress. Your body is collapsing. You need to get help." Help? What kind of help? Therapy. Medicine. How do you fix a life that's falling apart? The doctor prescribed antidepressants and gave me the card of a therapist. I started both. The pills took weeks to take effect, but the therapy was immediate and brutal. The therapist, Dr. Patricia Chun, was an Asian American woman in her 50s. Short hair, direct gaze, with no beating around the bush. In the second session, after I told her the whole story, she leaned forward and said, "Lauren, do you realize you're being abused?" I blinked. Abused? "No, he never hit me. He never, ... She cut me off. Abuse doesn't have to be physical. Emotional abuse is abuse. And what you're describing, the manipulation, the isolation, the calculated cruelty, that's abuse. That word fell like a bomb in the office. Abuse. I was being abused. For 30 years, I had been abused, and I hadn't realized it because it didn't leave visible marks. No bruises to show, no broken bones to prove. But inside, I was destroyed. Completely destroyed. And the man who promised to love and protect me was responsible. Dr. Chun gave me assignments, write about my feelings, set boundaries, start planning what my life would be like without David. But all of that seemed impossible. How do you set boundaries with someone who doesn't respect your existence? How do you plan a life when you don't know who you are outside this marriage? June turned into July. David continued going out every night, coming back late, ignoring me during the day. I continued losing weight, losing sleep, losing pieces of myself. One night in mid-July, he got home at 5 in the morning. I know because I was awake, like always. I heard the door, heard the footsteps, and something inside me broke. I got up, marched to the guest room, knocked on the door. "What?" he grunted, irritated. I opened the door. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, taking off his shoes, smelling like alcohol and perfume. "I need to know," I said, voice shaking. "Is there someone else? Are you seeing someone?" He looked at me with that expression of pure boredom. Lauren, I already told you. It's none of your business. Now, get out of here and let me sleep. But I didn't leave. For the first time in 30 years, I didn't obey. I stood there. I deserve to know. You owe me that after 30 years. You owe me the truth. David stood up, walked over to me, stopped so close I could smell his alcoholic breath. I don't owe you anything, Lauren. Nothing. I gave you 30 years of my life. I gave you 3 children. I gave you this house. I worked to support this family while you played teacher. And now I want my life back. You understand? I want my life back. Each word was a hammer blow. When he finished, I was crying, and he simply pushed me aside, gently closed the door in my face. I went back to my room, locked myself in, and did something I had never done. I picked up the phone and called Susan at 5:30 in the morning. She answered sleepy, worried. Lauren, what's wrong? Are you okay? No, I said, sobbing. No, I'm not okay. Susan, I don't know how much longer I can take this. I don't know if I want to continue. There was silence on the other end. Then, stay where you are. I'm coming over. Half an hour later, Susan was at my door, hugging me while I completely fell apart, and for the first time since it all started, I wasn't alone in my pain. Susan stayed with me the rest of that morning, made coffee, forced me to eat a piece of toast, sat with me at the kitchen table while the sun rose through the windows. David came out of the guest room around 9, saw us there, rolled his eyes, and left the house without saying a word. When the door slammed behind him, Susan held my hand. Lauren, you need to end this. You need to ask him to leave the house, or you need to leave. This is killing you. I knew she was right. I could feel I was dying, not physically, but in every other possible way. My soul was dying. My identity was dying. The person I was, or thought I was disappearing a little more each day. But I was so afraid of being alone, afraid of having wasted 30 years of my life, afraid that without David, I was nothing. My entire adult life had been defined by him. David's wife, mother of David's children, the woman who stayed home waiting for David to come back from trips. Who was Lauren Martinez without those labels? I had no idea, and that terrified me more than the pain I was feeling. At least the pain was familiar. At least I knew how to survive it, even if barely. The unknown, the possibility of having to reinvent myself completely at 45, seemed impossible. August arrived. David finally announced he was leaving the house at the end of the month. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was panic. In the last 4 months, as torturous as it was having him there, at least he was there. I could see him, hear him, feel his presence. When he left for good, it would be real. The divorce would be real. The end would be real. And I wasn't ready. I would never be ready. In the last week of August, he filled his car with his things, clothes, books, some furniture. I watched from the living room window, seeing him carry box after box, carrying pieces of our life together, and all I could think was, he's taking away 30 years. He's taking away everything. On the last day, a Saturday, he came to get the last things. The boys weren't home. I think they couldn't watch. Maya came to stay with me. David went from room to room, getting tools from the garage, his things from the bathroom, some pictures he wanted. When he finished, he stood in the living room, looking around like he was taking mental inventory. Then he looked at me. Well, Lauren, I guess this is it. My throat was so tight I could barely breathe. David, I started, and my voice came out, broken, desperate. It doesn't have to be like this. We can try again. We can do therapy. We can. He raised his hand, cutting me off. No, it's over. I've already moved on. You should do the same. He left. The door closed, and something inside me broke in a way I didn't know was possible. I threw myself on the floor right there in the living room, sobbing so hard my whole body convulsed. Maya knelt beside me, trying to calm me, but there was no possible comfort. 30 years. 30 years of marriage, of history, of shared life, ended with, I've already moved on. He had already moved on. While I was still stuck, he was already free. While I was still dying a little every day, he was already living a new life. With someone else, being happy. While I fell apart, the following days were a blur. I called work and requested medical leave. My doctor signed without hesitation. One look at my state, and he understood I wasn't in any condition to work. I stopped eating almost completely. Stopped showering. Stopped getting out of bed. Maya and the boys took turns coming to see me, bringing food I didn't eat, trying to make me talk, but I couldn't. There were no words for the emptiness I felt. It was like someone had ripped my heart out of my chest and left a black hole in its place, sucking everything up. Joy, hope, will to live. Dr. Chun increased my antidepressants and saw me 3 times a week. "Lauren, you're in crisis," she said in one of the sessions. "I'm worried about you. Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself?" I didn't answer immediately, because, yes, I was. Not concrete thoughts of suicide, not specific plans, but vague thoughts that it would be easier to simply not exist, not wake up, not have to face another day in that bottomless pit of pain. Sometimes, I finally admit it, voice low, sometimes I think it would be easier if I wasn't here. Dr. Chun leaned forward, voice firm but gentle. "Lauren, I need you to promise me something. If those thoughts get stronger, if you start making plans, you call me. You call your children. You go to the hospital. You promised." I promised. But the truth is, I didn't know if I could keep it. Because there were nights when the pain was so unbearable, I just wanted it to stop. I didn't necessarily want to die. I just wanted to stop feeling that. Stop waking up every day and remembering he was gone. Stop seeing the empty side of the bed. Stop hearing the silence of the house that used to be full of life. There was one night in September, almost 2 weeks after he left, that I stood in the bathroom with a bottle of pills in my hand, just holding it, looking, thinking how easy it would be. Just swallow and sleep and never wake up to that pain again. My phone rang. It was Maya. Video call. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Her face filled the screen, and behind her I could see my 3-year-old grandson, Noah, jumping on the couch. "Grandma? Grandma?" he yelled, waving at the camera. Maya smiled. "Hey, Mom? Noah wanted to show you something." "Noah, show Grandma what you made today at school." Noah ran and came back with a drawing, a house, a huge yellow sun, and stick figures. "This is me, this is Mommy, this is Daddy, and this is you, Grandma." He pointed proudly at the gray-haired Figudi. "You live here with us in the drawing because I love you so much." I looked at that childish drawing through the phone screen, held the pill bottle tighter, and started to cry, but it was a different kind of crying, because I realized in that moment that I wasn't just David's ex-wife. I was Noah's grandma. I was Maya's mom, Brandon's, Tyler's. I was a teacher to hundreds of children over the years. I had created life, taught, loved, mattered. And if I gave up now, if I took those pills, I wouldn't just be ending my pain, I'd be creating pain in all those other people who loved me. "Grandma, are you crying?" Noah asked, worried. "I am, baby," I said, wiping my face. "But it's okay. These are happy tears because I loved your drawing so much." After we hung up, I went to the kitchen and threw the pills in the trash. Not all the pills. I still needed the antidepressants, but that specific bottle I was holding with bad intentions, I threw it away and collapsed on the kitchen floor, crying, but with a small spark of determination. I wasn't going to let David take this from me too. He had already taken my marriage, my identity as a wife, 30 years of my life, but he wasn't going to take my whole life. I wasn't going to allow it. Still, the following months were dark. September, October, November passed in a gray fog of depression. I went back to work, but was functioning on autopilot. I'd smile when necessary, speak when questioned, but inside I was dead. I had stopped thinking about suicide, but I had also stopped wanting to live. I just existed. I'd wake up, get through the day, go back home, throw myself in bed, sleep heavily with the help of medication, and wake up to do it all again. Weekends were the worst empty hours I'd filled watching TV without paying attention, looking at my phone, waiting for a message from him that never came. And then, in December, David started showing up again. Not to stay. He had an apartment on the other side of town, but to visit the kids. He'd show up on Sundays for family lunch, show up at the grandkids' events. And I, like an idiot, let hope creep back in, because he was there. He was laughing with the children, making jokes, being the charming David I knew. Once, at a Christmas lunch, he helped me wash the dishes. We stood side by side at the sink, and for a moment, just one brief moment, it felt like what it used to be. "Thanks for doing this," he said, drawing a plate. "Doing what?" "Letting me come. Keeping the family together." Even after everything, my heart jumped. Was he regretful? Was he missing it? This pattern continued. He'd come, be nice, and then leave. And every time he left, I'd plummet again. It was a brutal emotional roller coaster. My kids started to notice. "Mom, do you realize he's manipulating you again?" Brendan said in January. "He doesn't want you back. He just wants to maintain control. Wants to make sure you'll always be here whenever he needs, but without having to actually be committed to you." I knew Brandon was right. On some rational level, I knew. But the heart isn't rational, and my heart still belonged to David, even after everything he had done. The therapist saw it too. "Lauren, you're prolonging your pain," Dr. Chun would say. "Every time you allow him to come back, every time you let hope in, you're restarting the grieving process. You need to cut contact. You need to create distance." But how? How do you cut contact with your children's father? How do you create distance when he shows up at every family event? And more importantly, how do you give up hope when it's the only thing keeping you alive? Because that's what hope did. It kept me breathing. The hope that maybe, just maybe, he'd realize the mistake he'd made, that he'd come back, that we'd fix everything and go back to being the happy couple from the vow renewal. It was in February 2019, exactly 1 year after the vow renewal, that I finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had tormented me since April. He had come to pick up Maya to take her to the mechanic. Her car was having problems. When they came back, Maya went straight in to shower, and David stayed in the living room for a moment. "David," I said, voice shaken, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He sighed, that tired sigh I knew so well. "What, Lauren? Is there someone else? When you asked for the divorce, was there someone? Is there still?" The silence that followed lasted an eternity. Then he said, without looking me in the eyes, "Yes, there is. There was then, and there still is." The floor opened up again. 1 year. For a whole year, I had clung to the illusion that maybe it wasn't about someone else, that maybe it was about him needing space, freedom, time to think. But no, there was someone else. Probably the same woman he called baby on the phone. The same woman whose perfume I smelled on his clothes. The same woman he went to when he left our house. "How long?" I asked, tears already streaming. He finally looked at me. "Lauren, this won't help you. How long?" I screamed. He stepped back. 2 years? About 2 years. The vow renewal was a lie. The last 2 years of our marriage were a lie. He was with someone else, loving someone else, building a life with someone else, while I still believed we were forever. The revelation that David had someone else for 2 years should have been the end. Should have been the moment I woke up, accepted reality, and moved on. But it wasn't. Because admitting he had betrayed me for 2 years, that he had renewed our vows while in love with another woman, that he had looked me in the eyes and lied shamelessly for so long, admitting, all that meant accepting I had been the biggest fool in the world, meant accepting that 30 years of what I thought was true love was actually a cruel illusion, and I still wasn't ready for that. So I did what I had done my whole life, swallowed the pain, rationalized the irrational, and kept waiting. But something changed that day. A tiny seed of anger was planted in the middle of my sadness. Anger was a new emotion for me. I had spent 45 years avoiding conflict, avoiding expressing discontent, avoiding any feeling that might disturb the superficial peace of my life. But now, lying in bed that night after his confession, I felt something boiling inside me. How did he have the nerve? How did he have the audacity to make me renew vows, spend money we didn't have to spare, gather the whole family, smile for photos, dance with me, whisper promises in my ear, all while cheating on me with another woman? What kind of person does that? The answer, I was beginning to realize, was simple: an abuser. Dr. Chun had used that word months ago, but I hadn't really understood until now. David wasn't just a husband who had fallen in love with someone else. He was a calculated manipulator who had kept me under control for 3 decades, who had systematically destroyed my self-esteem to ensure I'd never have the courage to question or leave, and who was now prolonging my agony because he could, because it was fun for him, because he liked having power over me. This realization was like taking a punch to the stomach and waking up at the same time. March 2019 brought an unexpected change. My younger sister, well, half-sister, my father's daughter with another woman, called from Texas. "Lauren, I know things are hard there. Why don't you come spend some time with me? Just a week. Get out of that environment, breathe different air." My first reaction was to say no. What if David showed up and I wasn't here? What if he needed me? But then I stopped and thought, why the hell am I worried if he needs me? He's had someone else for 2 years. He doesn't need me. He never needed me. So I said yes. I bought a plane ticket with my own money, my own decision, and went to Texas. That week was the first time in a year I could breathe. Houston was hot, loud, completely different from Arkansas. My sister took me to restaurants, museums, parks. She didn't force me to talk about David, but when I wanted to, she listened. And unlike my family here, who felt sorry for me, she got angry. "That son of a bitch," she'd say. "Sorry, Lauren, but I need to say it. What a son of a bitch. You deserve so much better than that." Hearing someone validate my anger, hearing someone say, I deserved better, was revolutionary. Because I had spent a whole year blaming myself, wondering what I had done wrong, assuming the failure was mine. But maybe it wasn't. One evening, we were sitting on her patio, drinking margaritas under the Texas stars. "Lauren," she said, "can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Why do you still love him? After everything he did, after all the pain he caused, why do you still want him back?" The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I had no answer. Why did I still love him? Was it even love? Or was it attachment, fear, habit? I was 16 when I married him. I didn't know who I was without him. Maybe what I loved wasn't David himself, but the illusion of security he represented, the illusion that I belonged somewhere, to someone. "I don't know," I finally said, and it was the most honest answer I'd given in months. I came back to Arkansas with something different inside me. It wasn't strength yet. I was far from being strong, but it was a small flame of self. I continued with therapy, increased the frequency to twice a week. Dr. Chun started working with me on something she called identity reconstruction. Who is Lauren Martinez without David? She'd ask, what do you like? What do you want? What makes you happy? These were questions I couldn't answer. I had spent so much time being defined by others, daughter, wife, mother, teacher, that I had never stopped to think about who I was as an individual. So we started small. Dr. Chun gave me assignments. Do one thing per week that was just for me. Something I wanted, regardless of what anyone else thought or needed. The first thing was ridiculously simple. I went to the movies alone. Sounds silly, but for me, it was terrifying. I had never gone anywhere alone. Always with David, or with the kids, or with friends. The idea of sitting in a dark room, surrounded by strangers, completely alone, gave me chills. But I went. I chose a random movie, a silly romantic comedy, bought popcorn, sat in the middle of the theater, and watched. And you know what happened? Nothing. The world didn't end. Nobody judged me. I laughed at the funny parts, cried at the sad parts, and when it was over, I left the theater with a strange and wonderful feeling. I had just done something completely for myself, and I had survived. But life isn't linear. It's not a smooth progression from weakness to strength. It's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, a side jump, a complete fall. David kept showing up for family events, and every time was a new wound. In May, at Noah's 3rd birthday party, he showed up with a woman. Didn't introduce her as a girlfriend, didn't say anything, but it was obvious. The way she touched his arm, how he smiled at her. I knew that smile. It used to be for me. I spent the whole party trying not to look, trying not to cry, trying to maintain composure in front of the children. When everyone left, I locked the door, went to the bathroom, and threw up. Threw up until there was nothing left in my stomach, until it was just bile and tears. I called Dr. Chun the next day, in crisis. I can't take it anymore, I said, crying on the phone. I can't see him with her. I can't. Is it too late for me? I wasted so much time waiting for him to come back, and now he's happy with someone else, and I'm still here, alone, broken. Is it too late? There was a pause. Then she said, with that firm, gentle voice, Lauren, listen to me. It's not too late. You're 46 years old. If you live to 80, you still have over 30 years ahead. Do you really want to spend those 30 years defined by your pain? Or do you want to use that time to discover who you can be? Those words echoed in my head for days. 30 years. I had 30 years ahead, potentially. What was I going to do with them? June 2019 was when I made the hardest decision of my life up to that point. I asked David to stop coming to family gatherings, unless it was something absolutely essential like a graduation or wedding. I can't take seeing you anymore, I said on the phone, voice shaking but firm. Every time you come, I go back to emotional zero. I need distance. I need to start healing. He was silent for a moment, then said, with that slightly irritated tone, All right, Lauren, if that's what you want, and hung up. I stood there holding the phone, heart racing, not knowing if I had just done the bravest or stupidest thing in my life. But I had done it. I had set a boundary. I had chosen myself for the first time. July brought something unexpected, real anger. Not that small spark that had started in February, but a real flame burning in my chest. I was in therapy, talking about the vow renewal, and suddenly all I felt was fury. He tricked me, I said, voice rising. He made me renew vows, spend money, gather the whole family, pose for pictures, all while he was fucking another woman. How did he have the nerve? How did he look me in the eyes and lie like that? Dr. Chun leaned forward. Keep going. Let it out. And you know what's worse? I let him do this to me. I let him control me, diminish me, destroy me for 30 years, and I never said anything. I never fought. I just swallowed everything and smiled and pretended everything was fine. I was crying now, but they were tears of anger, not sadness. I wasted 30 years of my life with a man who never truly loved me. 30 years, and I can't get that time back. He took everything. My youth, my identity, and I let him because I was too cowardly, too weak, too stupid to see what was happening. Dr. Chun waited for me to finish, waited for my breathing to normalize, then said, Lauren, you weren't cowardly, weak, or stupid. You were a victim of abuse. And abuse victims aren't weak. They're survivors. You survived? And now you're waking up. And that anger is healthy. That anger is what's going to take you to the other side. I started channeling that anger into action. First thing, official divorce processing. David and I had separated, but had never signed papers. I hired a lawyer, a woman named Rebecca Stone, specialized in cases of women leaving abusive relationships. You're entitled to half of everything, she told me in the first consultation. House, savings, his pension, 30 years of marriage. You're going to come out fine, but it wasn't about money. It was about closing that chapter officially, legally, definitively. It was about signing my name on a paper that said, I'm not yours anymore. Second thing, the ring. That damn ring I had worn for 30 years. I had tried to take it off several times over the past year, but never could. My hand would shake, My heart would race, and I simply couldn't do it. It was like taking off that ring was admitting final defeat. But in August 2019, almost a year after David left the house, I woke up one morning, looked at that ring, and thought, today, I went to the bathroom, put soap on my hand, and pulled. It hurt. The ring had gotten tight over the years, had created a permanent mark on my finger, but I pulled until it came off. And when it came off, I looked at that circle of gold in the palm of my hand, and something inside me broke free. I threw the ring in a drawer and didn't look back. Or, at least I tried not to, because 3 days later, I was having a panic attack at work, and when the school principal found me hyperventilating in the bathroom, all I could say was, I took off my ring. I took off my ring, and now it's real. He's gone, and he's not coming back, and it's all real. She hugged me while I sobbed, and when I finally calmed down, she said something I'll never forget. Lauren, do you know what it means that you took off that ring? It means you're choosing to live again. It means you're choosing yourself. And that's not weakness. That's the bravest thing you've ever done. September arrived, and with it, the first full anniversary of the separation. 1 year, 365 days since David left the house. And I was still standing. Broken? Yes. Hurt? Without a doubt. But standing? My kids noticed the change. Mom, you seem different, Maya said at a Sunday dinner. How so? I don't know. Lighter? Maybe. Less. Lost. I didn't know if I felt lighter, but I knew I was starting to find pieces of myself that I had lost a long time ago. Or maybe that I had never had a chance to know. The 16-year-old Lauren who got married pregnant never had the opportunity to discover who she was. Now, at 46, I was finally getting that chance, and I was terrified. But also, for the first time in a long time, I was a little hopeful. October 2019 marked 1.5 years since David asked for divorce, and for the first time since then, I woke up one day and didn't think about him immediately. It took almost a full hour, drinking coffee, checking emails, before I realized he hadn't been my first thought. Seems like a small victory. Insignificant even. But for me it was monumental. For 30 years, David had been the center of my universe, my first thought when waking up, my last thought before sleeping. Not thinking about him, even if just for an hour, meant the world was starting to spin around a new axis. And that new axis was beginning, slowly, to be myself. But reconstruction wasn't linear or easy. There were days I woke up feeling strong, capable, even hopeful. And there were days I woke up and the first thing I did was cry, because the reality of my situation, 46 years old, divorced after 30 years, alone, starting from scratch, crushed me completely. Dr. Chun taught me that relapses were normal, that healing wasn't a straight line going up, but a series of waves, highs and lows, progress and setbacks. Some days I surfed the waves, other days they swallowed me and I thought I'd drown. But even on the worst days, I was no longer thinking about giving up. I was just trying to survive until the next better day. November brought the Thanksgiving holiday, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't cook a huge feast. My kids wanted me to go to one of their houses, but I gently declined. I think this year I need to do something different, I told Maya. Different how? I don't know yet, but not the traditional way. I ended up spending Thanksgiving with Susan and her family. It wasn't the same. The house was different. The people were different. Even the turkey seasoning was different. But you know what? It was good. It was good to be in a place where there were no memories of David, where I wasn't constantly remembering 2 years ago when ... double quotes, or when the kids were little, and ... double quotes. It was good to create a new memory that had nothing to do with my past. December was challenging. The holidays had always been important in our family, and this would be the first Christmas officially alone. The kids offered to spend it with me, but I insisted they stay with their own families. Brandon and Tyler were already married. Maya was engaged. They had their lives, and I didn't want to be the sad mom they felt sorry for. So I planned something radical. I spent Christmas alone. I woke up, made special coffee, watched Mass on TV, cooked a small lunch just for me, and in the afternoon, I called each of my children and grandchildren on FaceTime. Was it strange? Yes. Was it sad sometimes? Also, yes. But it was mine. It was my choice. And there was something liberating about that. January 2020 brought a new decade and, with it, a sense of possibility. I did something I hadn't done in years. New Year's resolutions list. But not the typical ones about losing weight or saving money. My resolutions were about rebuilding my identity. Number 1, travel alone to a place I always wanted to go. Number 2, take a class in something I never tried. Number 3, finish furnishing my house the way I wanted, not the way David wanted. Number 4, spend a whole month without talking about David in therapy. Number 5, make 3 new friends. They were small, achievable goals, but that would require me to step out of my comfort zone. That would require me to be brave. The first resolution was the scariest: travel alone. I had barely driven alone to neighboring cities, let alone travel. But I remembered what Dr. Chun always said: courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the thing despite the fear. So I started researching. I wanted something not too far, not too expensive, but that would be special. I decided on Savannah, Georgia. I had always wanted to visit the historic houses, the gardens, that romantic southern atmosphere. I booked 3 nights at a bed and breakfast for March before I could change my mind. When I clicked confirm reservation, my heart was racing, but I had done it. I had bought a ticket to my own freedom. But then February 2020 brought something no one expected: news about a virus, COVID-19. At first it seemed distant, something happening in China, then in Europe. But when March came, the month of my trip, the whole world was going into lockdown. My trip was canceled. Schools closed. Suddenly, I was stuck at home, alone, without work to distract me, nowhere to go. My first reaction was panic. How was I going to survive complete isolation alone? How was I going to fill days and days without anywhere to escape? I thought I'd go crazy. But something strange happened. The forced isolation, which should have been my destruction, ended up being my salvation. Because for the first time in my life, I had no choice but to be with myself. No work to distract me. No social events to force me to pretend I was okay. No possibility of running into David at some family event. It was just me, my house, and my thoughts. At first, it was torturous. I spent the first 2 weeks of quarantine having anxiety attacks, calling my kids 3 times a day, watching news constantly until I felt worse. Dr. Chun switched to video call appointments, and in one of them, she gave me a challenge. Lauren, I want you to spend a week without turning on the TV, without checking news, without calling anyone. Unless it's an emergency, I want you to be in silence with yourself and see what emerges. A week without distractions seemed impossible, but I tried. And in the first 2 days, I thought I'd die of boredom and anxiety. But on the 3rd day, I started noticing things. I noticed my house had sounds: the kitchen clock ticking, the air conditioner turning on and off, the birds outside. I noticed I had thoughts that weren't about David or about pain, thoughts about books I wanted to read, about how nice it would be to have a garden, about a recipe I wanted to try. On the 5th day, I picked up an old notebook and started writing. Not an organized diary, just random thoughts. And as I wrote, things started coming out that I didn't even know were there. Anger? Yes, still lots of anger. But also curiosity, hope, will to live. April and May passed in a strange rhythm. The world was paralyzed, but I, paradoxically, was starting to move again. I started doing yoga in the morning using YouTube videos. Nothing intense, just basic stretches, but something about connecting with my body, breathing intentionally, was profoundly healing. I started cooking for real for the first time in years. Not just making food, but experimenting with new recipes, making bread from scratch, baking elaborate cakes. I transformed the guest room, the room where David slept those 4 terrible months, into a creativity space. I took out the bed, put in a desk, bookshelves, plants. I made that space mine. And something else happened during the pandemic. David stopped showing up. There were no more family events for him to casually stop by, no more excuses for him to maintain that manipulative presence in my life. And without him there, without that constant source of renewed pain, I finally had space to truly heal. Months passed without me seeing him, without hearing his voice, and slowly he started occupying less space in my head. I stopped checking his social media, stopped asking the kids about him, stopped praying for him to come back, something I had done every night for almost 2 years. I simply stopped. June 2020 marked 2 years since David had asked for divorce, and for the first time, the date passed without me having a crisis. I noticed the day, acknowledged the significance, but didn't fall apart. In therapy, Dr. Chun commented on it. Do you realize this is the first time in 2 years you've gone through an important date related to David without falling apart? I realized, and it was liberating. It meant he no longer had power over me. The dates on the calendar were just dates, not anniversaries of trauma. I was starting to detach. July brought an important milestone. The divorce papers were finally finalized. 2.5 years after separation, it was official. I was no longer Mrs. David Martin. I was just Lauren Martinez. When the lawyer called to give me the news, I expected to feel sadness, grief, maybe even panic, but all I felt was relief. A relief so deep I started to cry, but they were tears of liberation, not loss. It's over, I told Rebecca, my lawyer. It's really over. It's over, she confirmed. You're free now, Lauren, truly free. Free. What a strange and wonderful word. I had spent 2.5 years in an emotional prison, and now the door was open. I could leave. I could breathe. August brought me a surprise. I received a message from David, the first in months. Lauren, we need to talk about dividing some items from the garage. Can I stop by Saturday? My first instinct was the usual panic, heart racing, sweating palms. But then I took a deep breath, remembered everything I had worked on in therapy, and responded, you can make a list of what you want and leave it on the porch. I'll leave the things there for you to pick up. I prefer not to see you. Sending that message was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the most empowering. I had set a boundary. I had chosen my well-being over his convenience. And when he responded with a simple okay, without arguing, without manipulating, I realized something. He only had power over me because I gave him power, and I was stopping giving it. September brought the return to school, hybrid, with COVID protocols, strange and difficult. But being back at work, being back with the children, was good for me. It reminded me I had purpose beyond being someone's ex-wife. I was an educator. I impacted lives. One of the new teachers, a young woman in her 20s named Emily, was also going through a divorce. She came to talk to me one day after school, tears in her eyes. Dr. Martinez, I know this might not be appropriate, but I heard you also went through a recent divorce, and I don't know how to survive this. I sat with her, offered tissues, and for the first time, I told my story out loud to someone who wasn't a therapist or family. I told about the 30 years, about the betrayal, about the years of emotional abuse I didn't even realize was abuse. I told about rock bottom, about almost giving up, about the long journey of healing. And when I finished, she looked at me with that look of recognition and said, how did you do it? How did you get to the other side? I thought for a moment. Honestly, day by day, hour by hour, sometimes. You don't need to know how you'll survive the next year. You just need to survive today. And tomorrow, you survive tomorrow. And eventually, you realize surviving turned into living. She hugged me, thanked me, and left. And I stood there, realizing that, for the first time, I had offered hope to someone. I had been the light that other people had been for me when I was in the dark. October arrived, and with it, my 47th birthday. My kids wanted to do something special, but I asked for something simple. Dinner with them and the grandkids at home. I cooked, we laughed, we played, and when everyone left and I was alone, cleaning the kitchen, I put on music, something I never did because David always controlled what played in the house, and I danced. I danced alone in my kitchen, ridiculous and happy, for the first time in so long. And in that moment, washing dishes with loud music and dancing like nobody was watching because nobody really was, I realized something profound. I was happy, not delirious, not euphoric, but a quiet, genuine happiness. I was okay, alone, but okay. And that was more than I thought would be possible 2 years ago. November 2020 brought elections, national uncertainty, and a world still stuck in a pandemic. But for me, it brought something different: clarity. I had spent the last months building a life that was mine, piece by piece, brick by brick. It wasn't the life I had imagined at 16 when I got married pregnant, nor the life I thought I'd have at 45 when I celebrated 30 years of marriage. It was something completely new, something I was creating as I went along. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't following a script written by someone else. I was writing my own story. December came, and with it, the opportunity to fulfill my New Year's resolution from January: travel alone. COVID restrictions were more flexible, and I decided it was time, not Savannah, that would be for later, but somewhere closer, safer, the Tennessee mountains. I rented a small cabin near Gatlinburg for 5 days. When I told my kids, they were worried. "Mom, are you sure? Alone? What if something happens?" But Maya, my youngest daughter, who had seen me at my worst, put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Let her go. She needs this." And I did. I needed to prove to myself that I could. The trip was revealing in ways I didn't expect. I drove alone through the mountains, music playing loud, windows open despite the December cold. I arrived at the cabin at sunset, a little wooden house overlooking the mountains, fireplace, porch with a rocking chair. It was perfect. On the first night, I made simple dinner, lit the fireplace, and sat on the porch with a blanket, just watching the stars. There was no city noise, no distractions, just me and nature. And for the first time in over 2 years, I felt at peace. Real peace. Not just absence of pain, but presence of something good. I spent those 5 days hiking the trails, reading books I had bought but never opened, writing in my journal, thinking about who I had been, who I was now, who I wanted to become. One morning, I woke up early and watched the sunrise over the mountains, and I started to cry, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude. Gratitude for being alive, gratitude for having survived, gratitude for this second chance to truly live. I grabbed my phone and took a selfie, messy hair, no makeup, tears on my face, smiling. I posted on Instagram for the first time in years with the caption, 47 years old and finally learning who I am. Better late than never. I came home invigorated. January 2021 arrived with unusual snow in Arkansas, covering everything with a white blanket. I should have been stuck, frustrated, but instead I made hot chocolate, put on music, and watched the snow fall through the window with something I can only describe as contentment. My kids called to check, worried I was alone during the snowstorm. "I'm great," I said, honestly. "Better than I've been in a long time." And it was true. The loneliness that once terrified me had transformed into solitude, and solitude was different. Solitude was choice, was peace, was space to grow. February marked 3 years since the vow renewal. That celebration that was actually the beginning of the end. I thought about that Lauren from 3 years ago, so desperate to prove her marriage was real, so blind to the signs, so stuck in an illusion. And I felt compassion for her. Not shame, not anger, compassion. She did the best she could with the tools she had. She survived a difficult childhood, an early marriage, decades of subtle manipulation, and she had resisted. She had been stronger than she knew. And now, 3 years later, she was free. I wrote a letter to that Lauren, to myself from 3 years ago. "Dear Lauren, I know you're scared. I know you think you won't survive what's coming, but I want to tell you, you will. You're stronger than you imagine. And on the other side of that pain, there's life. There's joy. There's you, finally. Hold on. You're going to make it." March brought the COVID vaccine, and with it, the promise of a reopening world. Schools went back to full in-person. Life started resuming some normalcy, or at least a new version of normal, and I finally rescheduled my trip to Savannah. This time, I didn't cancel. This time, I spent a week exploring the city alone, visited museums, walked through the historic squares, had dinner at restaurants, sitting at a table for one, read books on park benches, and I didn't feel lonely once. I felt free. I felt alive. I took hundreds of photos, not to post, but for me, to remember that I had done this, that I had been brave. One night in Savannah, I was having dinner at a waterfront restaurant when a man from the next table struck up a conversation. "Sorry to bother, but I noticed you're alone." "I am too. Would you mind if I sat?" My first instinct was to say no, protect my space, keep distance. But then I thought, why not? I let him sit. We talked for hours. He was a widower, had lost his wife 5 years ago, was relearning to live too. We didn't exchange numbers, didn't promise to keep in touch. It was just a genuine human connection without expectations. And when we said goodbye, he said something that stayed with me. "You have a light in your eyes. Whatever you went through, you survived, and you're shining." I went back to the inn that night and cried, but they were good tears. Tears of recognition that, yes, I was shining again. April 2021 marked exactly 3 years since David asked for divorce. 3 years. 1,095 days since that terrible Tuesday when my world fell apart. And I was here. Not just surviving, but living. In therapy, Dr. Chun asked, "How do you feel today compared to 3 years ago?" I thought carefully. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over, that without David, I was nothing. Today, I know my life is just beginning, that I'm someone interesting, capable, strong, independent of anyone else. It took me 47 years to discover this, but I finally know. Dr. Chun smiled. "Lauren, when you started therapy with me, you could barely look me in the eyes. Today, you're sitting there, confident, talking about yourself with affection. Do you realize how much you've transformed?" May brought Maya's wedding. She had postponed it twice because of the pandemic, but it finally happened. And for the first time at a large family event, David and I were in the same space. He came with his girlfriend, the same woman he'd been with for 3 years, I assumed. And you know what I felt seeing them? Nothing. Not anger, not pain, not jealousy. Just ... nothing. He was a person I once knew, someone I shared history with, but who no longer had power over me. During the reception, he tried to make conversation. "Lauren, are you okay?" I smiled politely. "I'm great, David, better than I've ever been. Enjoy the wedding." And I walked away. No drama, no emotion, just a polite goodbye. Later, Maya pulled me aside. "Mom, I saw you talking to Dad. Are you okay?" "I'm perfect, baby. Today is about you, not about him or me. It's about love and future and good things. And I'm genuinely happy, and June brought me an important decision: buy a new house. The house where I lived was full of memories of David, of marriage, of pain. I had redecorated, had transformed spaces, but it was still that house. So I decided it was time for a truly new beginning. I found a small house, perfect for one person, with a backyard garden where I could plant flowers. I used the money from the divorce settlement, added my savings, and bought the first house that was completely mine. When I received the keys, I sat on the floor of the empty living room and cried with joy. This was Meanie. Nobody could take this from me. I spent the next months furnishing slowly, choosing each piece carefully, creating a space that reflected who I was, not who I thought I should be or who someone wanted me to be, but who I really was. July brought my first date since the divorce. A friend from school insisted on introducing me to someone, a retired teacher, widower, kind. I agreed hesitantly. The dinner was ... pleasant. He was nice. We talked, well, laughed. But at the end of the night, when he asked if we could see each other again, I realized something. I wasn't ready, and more importantly, I didn't need to be ready. There was no rush. There was no pressure. I was fine alone. So I said, honestly, you're wonderful, but I think I'm still not in a place where I want to date. I hope you understand. He understood. In driving home that night, I felt powerful because for the first time in my life, I had put my needs first without feeling guilty. August 2021 marked 3 years since David physically left the house, ending those 4 months of torture. 3 years, and I was here in my new house with my new life, being a new person. My kids constantly commented on the change. Mom, you seem so much happier, Brandon said at a Sunday lunch at my new house. You're radiant. And I was. Not because I found another man, not because I got rich or famous or perfect, but because I had found myself. I had discovered I could be happy alone. That I didn't need someone to complete me because I wasn't incomplete. I was whole. September brought an unexpected opportunity, an invitation to give a talk at an educator's conference about resilience and teachers' mental well-being. The organizer had heard through colleagues that I had an inspiring story of overcoming. My first reaction was to refuse to expose my pain to hundreds of strangers. Terrible. But then I thought about Emily, that young teacher who had come talk to me about her divorce. I thought about how many other women were suffering in silence, thinking they were the only ones, thinking they were weak or defective. And I agreed. I wrote an honest talk about emotional abuse, about depression, about reconstruction. And when I went up on that stage in October, looking at 200 people, my voice trembled at first. But then I found my rhythm, told my story, and at the end, when I finished, half the audience was crying. And afterward, woman after woman came to talk to me, share their own stories, thank me for exposing myself. I thought I was alone, one of them said. Thank you for showing me I'm not. November 2021 took me back to the Tennessee mountains, this time with Susan and a group of friends. We laughed, told stories, drank wine on the cabin porch, watched the stars. And at one point, Susan said, Lauren, do you realize how much you've changed? Remember when you called me at 5 a.m, crying, saying you didn't know if you wanted to continue? Look at you now. You're living again. I looked around at these women who had carried me in my worst moments, who had believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and felt deep gratitude. I wouldn't have made it without you, I said. Without support, without therapy, without people believing I could. Susan shook her head. No, honey, we supported you, but you did the work. You chose to live, you chose to fight. That was all you. December brought the end of another year, and with it, reflection. I was 48 now. I had spent 30 years in a marriage that wasn't real, almost 4 years recovering from the end of that marriage. Over 3 decades of my life spent in a relationship that destroyed me. It would be easy to look at that and see waste, see lost time, see failure, but I chose to see differently. I chose to see survival, strength, growth, because yes, I lost time, but I gained wisdom. I gained empathy. I gained the ability to help other people who are where I was, and most importantly, I gained myself. Lauren Martinez, not as someone's wife or someone's mother, but as Lauren, just Lauren. And she was enough. January 2022 brought a new year and new possibilities. I didn't know what the future held. Maybe eventually I'd meet someone and fall in love again. Maybe not. Maybe I'd travel the world. Maybe I'd stay in Arkansas. Maybe I'd write a book about my experience. Maybe I'd keep everything private. The beauty was that I didn't need to know. For the first time in my life, I was comfortable with uncertainty. I was comfortable letting life unfold without trying to control every aspect. I was comfortable being, just being. If you're reading this, if you're going through something similar, an abusive marriage, a devastating divorce, a loss of identity so deep you don't know who you are without the other person, I want you to know some things. First, you're not alone. There are thousands, maybe millions of us, surviving and rebuilding ourselves. Second, it's not your fault. Emotional abuse is real, it's devastating, and it doesn't leave visible marks, but that doesn't make it any less valid. Third, it's possible to heal, not fast, not easy, not linear, but possible. And fourth, most important, you are enough, exactly as you are, now Broken or rebuilding or still at rock bottom, you are enough. You have value. You deserve love, respect, dignity, happiness. I'm not going to lie and say everything became perfect. I still have bad days. I still do therapy. I still take antidepressants. I still wake up sometimes with that, not in my stomach, but those days are increasingly rare. And between them, there are good days, great days. Days when I laugh so hard my stomach hurts. Days when I look in the mirror and like the person looking back. Days when I feel grateful to be alive. And those days, those precious and beautiful days, are worth every second of the fight to get here. If I could get out of that place and find myself again, believe me, you can too. The door is there. You just need to have the courage to turn the handle. And on the other side, there's you, the real you, waiting to be discovered. And she's incredible. I promise.